Welcome to One Chosen, where we use our scriptural foundation in order to discuss certain topics as being led by the Spirit. So today's topic is called Black Influences of the British Isles, Names and Surnames. So what this video is going to do is give the viewer an abundance of information on things I've found in books and in sources on the influences that blacks had on British culture, specifically names, surnames, and place names. So without further ado, let's get into the lesson. So to start this off and gain some foundation from the scripture. Now, since this lesson is on naming, we must firstly gain some foundation on naming systems. Now, the one thing about the naming system in the scriptures is that people were named after their characteristics, after certain events that happened when they came to the earth. So let's look at some examples of that. Here's the first one. So this is coming from Genesis chapter 29, and this is actually talking about the birth of the patriarchs of the 12 tribes of Israel. So it's talking about Jacob and how he had two wives and how he tried to get both of them pregnant. So let's start off from verse 30. It says, and he, meaning Jacob, went in also unto Rachel, meaning he had sexual intercourse with Rachel. And it says, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and she served with him yet 7 other years. Verse 31. And when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, keep that in mind, Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren, meaning Rachel could not get pregnant. Verse 32, and it says, and Leah conceived, meaning she was pregnant, and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, the Lord have looked upon my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me. So to break it down in the naming system, we can clearly see that Leah was hated. Now because she was hated, she called her son Reuben, which means surely the Lord have looked upon my affliction. So the event that happened was that she was hated and she named her son Reuben. Alright, this next one is from Genesis chapter 25, and it's talking about the birth of two notable figures throughout the scriptures, Jacob and Esau. So to start off when Leah was pregnant, having both of them in her womb. So it says, verse 24, and when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. So the twins were Jacob and Esau. It says, verse 25, and the first came out red all over like an hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. Now at the start of the video I said that in the scriptures, the naming systems surrounded events that occurred throughout a child's birth or certain characteristics of that child. Now as we can see here, it says he was called Esau because he was red all over like an hairy garment, which is simply a characteristic of that child. And that's what Esau means. It means hairy. And for those who are very articulate in the scriptures, they will know that he changed his name to Edom because he was red. Now, by knowing this naming system, you should also understand that this has been a naming system that's been going on for centuries, possibly thousands of years. So now you have the understanding that people were named by their characteristics. Now we can get into some sources. This is from a book by Alexandra McBain called Etymology of the Principal Gaelic National Names, Personal Names, Surnames. This is what happens when you look up the word Duff. It says Duff, meaning dub, in parentheses, Clan Dub or Clan Duff, of which was Macbeth, etc. So basically, it's saying that Dub and Clan Duff are basically synonymous. And it says, earlier Dub, King Duff in the 10th century, from Gaelic Dub, now Dub, with a H, is black. So keep that in mind. Anytime you hear that word dub, D-U-B or D-U-B-H, it means black. And we're going to see that further on throughout the lesson. Alright, so if that's not enough, we're going to look into this next book. This is by Clifford Stanley Sims, and it's called The Origin and Signification of Scottish Surnames. So keep that in mind, that it's the origin. It's not the modern version of the name, it's the origin. So let's look into this book and see what he says on this word Duff. So it says Duff, black. See, it's come up again. Duff, black, The family descended from the celebrated Macduff, Thane of Fife, in the 11th century. So Thane is just basically a nobleman in the British Empire. But what's so ironic about this is that William Shakespeare actually based his whole story of Macbeth off these real life individuals, Macduff and Macbeth. And also you can also throw in Duncan as well. So anytime you see that word Mac, that means son of. So when you say Macduff, it means son of Duff. Or when you say MacDonald, it means son of Donald. Alright, this is the last one. This comes from a book called The Scottish Nation, or Surnames, Families, Literature, Honours and Biological History of the People of Scotland by William Anderson. And this is on page 71. It reads, Duff, a surname adopted from the Celtic. So we read earlier that it was adopted by the Gaelic, but now it says it adopted by the Celtic, in which language the word means black. Sibbald in his History of Fife says that as Niger and Rufus were names of families amongst the Romans, from the colour and complexion of the men, so it seems Duff was, from the swarthy and black colour of those of the tribe or clan of Macduff. Duff, King of Scotland, son of Malcolm the Dust, succeeded Indulf in 961. So there it is. The author's telling you flat out that the people descending from Duff were what? Swarthy and black in colour. So as we looked up before in the past sources, it's shown that the word Duff means black. But here it's basically saying that them descendants of Duff, the Macduffs, meaning the sons of Duff, were indeed dark in complexion or swarthy. And don't think that statement flew over my head which I just read. Let's read it again. It says that as Niger and Rufus were names of families amongst the Romans, from the colour and complexion of men. So what's that saying about some of the Romans? They were indeed of dark complexion. So to be a Roman doesn't actually mean you're an ethnic Italian. It means you're a citizen of Rome. It was basically a passport. Just like today, how you will say, I'm a British citizen. It does not technically mean that you are ethnically British. It just means you're a citizen of Britain. So the same thing was going on with the Romans. Because what did Paul say? Paul said, I am indeed of the tribe of Benjamin. But yet in Acts chapter 22 verse 27, the Roman asked him, tell me, are you a Roman? And he said, yea, meaning yes. So Paul, even though he was a tribe of Benjamin, he was an Israelite, he was basically saying, yeah, I have Roman citizenship. And not to mention, it says in this very same verse that as Niger and Rufus were families amongst the Romans. So keep in mind that word Niger was a name amongst the Romans. This is Acts chapter 13 verse 1. It reads, Now there were in the church that was at Antioch certain prophets and teachers, as Barnabas and Simeon, that was called Niger. You see, so Antioch was a Greek city that was conquered by the Romans. But as you can see here, that Barnabas and Simeon were called Niger, which is pretty much the same as the word nigger. But as you can see that these were actually Israelites, these were prophets who were called these names. And these were names that was amongst the Romans, which is what we just read. But anyway, I won't touch on too much on the Romans, but the word Duff means black, and the tribe of the people were indeed black. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. I just want to put the nail in the coffin with this last book. This is a book called Family Names from the Irish, Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Norman and Scotch, considered in relation to their etymology, by Thomas G. Gentry. It reads, Duffy, dub, remember that word dub that we just read? Black, an individual, a black person. So that is the nail in the coffin. I mean, we had three sources before this, but it's basically saying that yes, Duffy or dub means a black person. So when you look at that word doff again, it's denoting the complexion of them people. Black. So here's another surname. This is in the same book, but on page 214. This is that surname called Dougal. Now you might have heard that word Dougal before. This is what it means. It says from dub, which we know means black. Then it says Gaul, a stranger. So Gaul means a stranger. So when we put two and two together, it says a black stranger. So Dougal means a black stranger. Here's another source. This is from that other book that we read called The Origin and Signification of Scottish Surnames. It's on page 112. It says Dougal, the black stranger. So there we go. We got two sources that prove that Dougal means a black stranger. So it's talking about an individual who's not only a stranger, but he's a black stranger, meaning a dark-skinned stranger. All right, so we're going to jump back in that same book we read called Family Names Are From the Irish. And this is on page 214. So now we're going to look up another surname called Douglas. Now, I know a lot of people have heard this name before. So just think of famous people like Frederick Douglass or Michael Douglas. This is a famous surname, this is. So let's look up the word Douglas to see what it means. It says Douglas. Dub. See, there we go again. That word dub, which we know means black or dark. Then we got glass, meaning green or grey. So the word Douglas means dark green or dark grey. So pay that in mind. So the next question is, which since we know what the word Douglas means, who were the Douglases? What does history state about these people? So let's see. This is from a book called When Scotland Was Jewish, and this is on page 59. It reads, the noble Scots family first appeared in Britain around 1300 and settled on the Scottish border. So this is actually during the time of Braveheart, literally just straight after when William Wallace died. I don't know if you watched a movie called The Outlaw King. This was actually set in the 1300s, so the early 1300s this was. So it says, one standard reference book observes that the Douglases were one of Scotland's most powerful families, and it is therefore remarkable that their origins remain obscure. Way and Squire 1998. The name Douglas means dark stranger. So just like that word Dougal, which means dark stranger, so does the word Douglas. And to be honest, when you think about it, they kind of sound the same. But anyway, let's read. It says, the name Douglas means dark stranger in Gaelic and may have originated from the Mediterranean complexions of the family founders. The Douglases, so named from their dark colouring, were the dominant force on the borders between England and Scotland from 1300 to 1455. So let's not get into our feelings and try and shoot the messenger. I'm only stating what the authors are stating. And by the way, I didn't read it out, but this author is actually quoting other authors as well. So it shows that this is not pseudo scholarship. This just shows he's peer reviewed each statement. But anyway, it says that the Black Douglases was so named from their dark colouring. So there were black people in Scotland as well. The Douglases. And even with this shouldn't actually be a shock, because in my last video, the Black Monarchs of the British Isles part 2, I actually showed that Robert the Bruce's right hand man, Sir James Douglas, or better yet known by his nickname, the Black Douglas, was a so-called black man. But now I just actually went into depth to show who the Douglases actually were and who he actually descended from. So the Douglases were indeed black Scots. But what history states is that there were two lines of the House of Douglas. You had the Black Douglases, which are the ones we just read about, and then you also had the Red Douglases. And what happened was that these two fractions actually went to war with each other. So let's read from this book called The Origin and signification of the Scottish surnames. So it says, after forfeiture of the Earls of Douglas in 1455, their estates reverted to the crown, but they were shortly afterwards bestowed on the 4th Earl of Angus, head of a junior branch of the old family, descended from George Douglas, the only son of William, the 1st Earl of Douglas, by his third wife, Margaret, Countess of Angus. The Angus branch assisted in the destruction of the parent house. So he was a parent house. It says, and it became a saying in allusion to the complexion of the two races that the red Douglas had put down the black Douglas. So we had two different lines of the Douglases. So we had the black Douglases and we had the red Douglases. But what happened was the red Douglases actually took down the black Douglases. So let's read on. The House of Liddesdale being characterized as the black Douglas and that Angus as the red. So here we go. We had two complexions, two different races fighting against each other. But what happened was the red Douglases actually won this battle. And after this battle, the black Douglases actually fell in power. It's not until the 1600s where the red Douglases actually took on the name Douglas, and the black Douglases would no longer continue the name. So this is from Wikipedia when you look up the title Earl of Douglas. So when you scroll down and look under black and red Douglases, I'm going to read from the 4th line down from the top. It says, retrospectively, the two branches of Douglas and Angus were described as the black and red lines respectively. I'm on the 2nd paragraph now. It says, the black Douglases fell from power and were attainted by King James II in 1455. Now I'm on the last paragraph. It says, the title of Douglas was restored in 1633 for the red Douglas line. So you see that the red Douglas continued that name. So essentially the black Douglases, their name will actually diminish from it. So it kind of sounds like a Jacob and Esau type of story, but in reverse. But anyway, that's the history on the Douglases. So as we know, the original meaning of the word Douglas means dark grey or dark green. But as the author stated, it can also mean black stranger. This is from a book called Ancient and Modern Britons by David McRitchie. This is on page 193. It reads, the Douglases, the Farce, and the Youngs are generally dark complexioned with black hair, while the Blythes mostly are light haired and of fair complexion. So when you look at movies like The Outlaw King, when it shows you James Douglas with black hair, that's not accurate description. It tells you here that the Douglases had black hair and were of a dark complexion, which is what the Outlaw King deceived us in showing. So to round it up, yes, you had red complexioned Douglases. And by the way, with that red complexion, I'm not too sure if that's exactly red as in white or red as in red bone. But either way, you had different complexions of the Douglases. You had the red and you had the black. So Douglas doesn't mean someone with dark hair or black hair, because as you've seen through the text, it made a clear distinction between the black hair and the dark complexion, which were two traits that the Douglases had, and not to mention about the Farce and the Youngs. And these are names that so-called blacks have today, but they indeed think that they were named after their slave master. But in reality, these were actually black people's names throughout Europe. Alright, now let's look up the next surname called Brown. Now this should actually seem very self-explanatory for the majority of you, but either way I'll still break it down. Just think about all these celebrities. We got James Brown, Chris Brown, Antonio Brown. So these are all these celebrities named after Brown. Now, was they named after their slave master? Well, let's see. So this is from the same book called The Origin and Signification of Scottish Surnames. And this is on page 22. It reads, Brown, originally Brown, and Libron, meaning dark complexioned. So now the question should come up is, was you really named after your white slave master who was called brown? Or was you named after yourselves who were initially dark complexioned? Or could it be that your slave master took on your name and perpetrated your identity to claim it for himself? That's something for you to think of. Anyway, this is from a next book called Origin of the Anglo-Saxon Race by Thomas William Shaw. It reads, Brown, the consideration of the probable origin of the greater proportion of brunettes. Remember that word brunette and what it meant in my last video? The word brunette means someone of a brown complexion and brown hair. So let's read it again. It says the consideration of the probable origin of the greater proportion of brunettes, so great proportion of dark-skinned people, in two of the South Midland countries of England leads us to that of colour names as surnames and place names, which may have probably derived from the original settlers. For an example, there is a common name Brown. This is derived from the Anglo-Saxon brun, signifying brown. It is not reasonable to doubt that when our forefathers called a man brun or brown, they favour him this name as descriptive of his brown complexion. So there you go. The author is not only stating that there was a great proportion of brunettes or great proportion of dark-skinned people in the two of the South Midland countries of England, but that the name brown is signifying the complexion of them people. Now this shouldn't be really much of a shock if you watch my other video called Exposing the Lies on History. I break down archaeology and I break down scientific evidence that prove that the people, the original people of England, were black. But history does not show this. History just shows that England was inhabited by only the fair complexion people, but not according to the text. According to the text, there was indeed dark-skinned people living in this region. So do you still believe that you only came from Africa? Or now you're starting to realize that you may have also came from Europe? Now this next word we're going to look at is a word called dun. And this word is actually in a lot of names, such as Dunbar or Duncan, which you may have heard of. So let's look up the etymology of this word. It's from a book called The Origin of the Anglo-Saxon Race by Thomas William Shaw, and it's on page 109. It reads, Dun, the evidence concerning brown people in England during the Anglo-Saxon period. So hold on, let me just stop there. So it said there's evidence concerning the brown people in England during the Anglo-Saxon period. This proves everything I'm bringing out is correct. So when was the Anglo-Saxon period? This is around the 5th century, 6th century, anywhere between the 400s and 500s. So those black people in England at this time. So let's read it again. So it says, Dun, the evidence concerning brown people in England during the Anglo-Saxon period, which can be derived from the place name Brun, remember that word Brun we looked up, is supplemented by the suppliers in at least some of the old place names beginning with Dun and Dunning. Dun is an Old English word denoting a colour partaking of brown or black. It is possible that it refers to brown people or their children. Keep that in mind. Rather than the Anglo-Celtic word dun, a hill or fortified place. So what the author's doing is making you know that the word dun is an Old English word denoting brown or black, and it may possibly be denoting people, rather than the Anglo-Celtic word, which means a hill or fortified place. So let's see which definition makes more sense. The author made mention to one word called dunning. So let's look up the word dunning in this very same book. Alright, so this is on page 41. When you look up the word dunning, it reads, Dunning, the name that signifies a dark offspring, from dun, which means black, and ing, a termination denoting children. So which definition makes more sense? Would it be a hill or fortified place? or would it mean brown or black? Now, there's no mention of the word hill or fortified place in this definition. It only mentions dark. It also mentions dun, where the author states clearly, he says the word dun means black. And then it says the ing is denoting children. So more than likely, the word dunning or dun is derived from black children. So there's a little bit more I want to bring out concerning the Anglo-Saxons. And this is on page 118. So it says, we can point in England to the fact that broad schools were found in the Anglo-Saxon graves, and to the historical fact that there were brown people in England during the Anglo-Saxon period, and there the evidence must be left. So this goes back to the last video I did called Exposing the Lies on History, when I showed you that scientists did a DNA analysis of these schools and found that the first inhabitants were indeed black. They actually called this person the Cheddar Man. So it shows you that I'm only bringing out truth. I'm not bringing out any lies. This is fact. This is evidence. Just like the author stated, it says, there the evidence must be left. So anyway, let's continue. It says, it may however be borne in mind that as brown passes into dark brown or black, the literacy evidence concerning brown Anglo-Saxons is strengthened by relating to the black men. So wait a minute, the author's stating that not only black people were living in England during the Anglo-Saxon period, but the Anglo-Saxons themselves were indeed black people. So let that sink in. The author just stated it's literacy evidence. So it's not opinions. It's not what you see on TV. It's fact. It's evidence. The Anglo-Saxons were black men. All right, so let me continue now. So it says, or to those designated by the old brown-black word, sweat. All these black words getting too much for me. But this links in with another video I did called The Black Monarchs of the British Isles Part 1, when I was bringing out the Stuarts. So when we looked at the word Stuart, it said there is another word used by the Anglo-Saxons to denote black or brown black, the word sweat. So what's that saying about the Stuarts? Yes, the Stuarts themselves are indeed black people also, and that resides for King James I of Scotland, Lord Darnley, Charles I, Charles II. These were all Stuarts. These were all black people. You see? So it's beautiful when you've done the diligent research. You can actually make connections between certain sources. Alright, so we're still going to stay on this same book. This is on page 41. So this is what happens when you look up the word Dunmore. So let's read. So it says, Dunmore, the name that signifies a dark offspring, from Dun, which we know means black, and Moor, meaning a Moor. So let's look up this word Moor and see what it means, because Negroes today still believe that this is a name that they got off their slave master. So this is from a book called A Dictionary of the English Language by Samuel Johnson. This is what happens when you look up the word Moor. So if you look at section 1, it says a marsh. If you look at section 2, it says a Negro, a black Moor. And next to it says Shakespeare. So let's keep that in mind. I'm going to pull another source in relation to this. This is from a book called Nature Knows No Color Line by J.A. Rogers. It's on page 75. Let's read. So it says, Shakespeare uses Negro only once and uses it interchangeably with Moor. So just like we read in the definition when it says black or Moor, then it said Shakespeare, it was referring to this, how Shakespeare used it interchangeably with the word Negro. But anyway, let's continue. It says, in the case of a white man getting a Negro woman with child, Moor for Negro was just coming into use. But in 1623, 7 years after Shakespeare's death, James Mabb, in his translation of Alamans Guzman de la Ferache, uses Negro almost always for Moor. So we're starting to see how synonymous the word Moor is to certain people. It was actually used as a byword in reference to the Negro. And does the entertainment industry know this? Well, of course they do. Because I remember watching a movie by Martin Lawrence called The Black Knight. And there's a scene where Martin Lawrence was speaking to the king. And I believe Martin Lawrence was speaking too much. And the king said to him, "Silence more," meaning silence Negro or silence black man, which goes to show that the entertainment industry actually knows the significance of this word and what it truly means. But anyway, if you haven't watched that movie, I recommend go watch it. We're going to continue with this word more. So this is from a website called heraldry.celticradio.net. So this is what happens when you look up the word more. It says, background. The name Moore is one of the leading surnames from the English-speaking world. So it says in the next paragraph, which is the second one down, it says, when the French wanted to indicate that a man was extremely dark, they frequently launched into a metaphor and called him Amour in the form of Le Moor or Maurice. Amour is a sparsely inhabited wasteland anywhere from Yorkshire to Devon, and a man who lived on the edge of it, probably a shepherd or herdsman, was apt to be identified with it in another man's mind. But in connection with the name, we have only to remember the tendency to call a black man a Moor, or even as black as a Moor, which produced the common word blackamoor and the surname blackamoor, which can also be local, to realize in this case, geography and personalities are hopelessly mixed together. So not to be biased or anything, as we've seen through the definition and as we've seen through this website, that moor can also mean a wasteland or a marsh. It's not always referring to a dark-skinned man, but that does not negate the fact that moor is also a definition for a dark-skinned person. Alright, so the next name we'll look up is a name called Duncan. This is from a book called Etymology of the Principal Gaelic National Names, Personal Names and Surnames by Alexandra McBain. It reads, Duncan, Doncad, Donocattus, Brown Warrior. From Don and Calf, Duncan means dark warrior. I mean, that's self-explanatory. I mean, who's brown? Who's brown in complexion? Who today calls themselves dark warriors or brown warriors? Look at sportsmen like Deontay Wilder. He called himself the Bronze Bomber, bronze being a derivative of brown. You can even look at Kobe Bryant, who called himself the Black Mamba, black being synonymous with dark. So the same thing was going on here. The word Duncan means brown or dark warrior. Now, I don't really like Googling things as a main source of information, but since we got a primary source, which was from the book, I decided to Google the word Duncan, and look what came up. It says it is of Scottish and Gaelic origin, and the meaning of Duncan is dark warrior or brown fighter. Alright, this is from a next book called The Negro Rulers of Scotland and the British Isles by Dr. John L. Johnson. It's on page 32. It says, the name Duncan means black or dark-skinned warrior. Well, I just love how the author just told you straight out, because when we looked at these other definitions, it didn't say nothing about the skin, but it's so obvious it's referring to the skin. Because when we look at words like swarthy or swarthy, we see that black, brown and dark are always synonymous with each other, and these were always referring to the complexion of a person. Alright, so we're going to look up some more common names. This from a book called The Origin and Signification of Scottish Surnames. This is what happens when you look up the word Nigel. So as you can see, the word Nigel means swarthy, and then when you look up the word Neil, it means dark complexion. Alright, the next one is Blake. As you can see, it says black of like parentage, meaning black-like descent. So it's basically saying that the word Blake refers to someone who's of Negroid descent. So what have we learned today? We've learned that melanated people or dark-skinned people had a major influence on British culture, with influence names such as Duff, Douglas, Blake, Duncan, and the list goes on. These names are not African names. Just because they're so-called black people does not mean that they're all African. It's common knowledge that Negroes were named after their oppressors during the slave trade, but it's not common knowledge that the slave masters were named after Negroes themselves. As we showed through the video, the names were in reference to the characteristics and the complexions of them people. When examining these words, we see consistencies in words such as dub and brun, which is in reference to black or brown skinned people. No matter how hard someone tries to hide the truth, it will always come out. It's just the way how God has designed the earth. And with that being said, I want to end it with a wise quote by Buddha. There are three things that cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth.